in Business Process Outsourcing, a transformation journey. I apologize for the late delay there. We had a little technical issue, but we're going forward now. I'll be working in the background to help answer any technical or general questions that you may have. But before we begin today's session, I'd like to quickly tell you about the questions box. We encourage you at any time during the presentation to submit your questions to today's speakers. To do so, please click on the questions box, type your question in the space provided, and click the submit button. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the recorded webinar and presentation slides. The webinar recording and presentation slides will also be available at outsourcing.com. So before we begin, I'd like to tell you about the Outsourcing Institute for those who aren't familiar with us. The Outsourcing Institute is a professional association dedicated to providing independent best practices, tools, roadshow events, and networking opportunities for all forms of outsourcing. Located at outsourcing.com, we have 70,000 members globally. OI specializes in providing low-cost and no-cost alternatives for outsourcing buyers in need of RFP tools, vendor selection assistance, training, as well as general support and coaching. For those of you who are in this market, we offer an array of very targeted sponsorship and promotional opportunities. Our sister company, CMS, provides recruiting services for those seeking to hire outsourced professionals experienced at buying, selling, managing, or consulting in this arena. Contact information is at the bottom of the screen for those who have any questions. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Peter Pisciotta. Peter is a client partner with Rumjog Enterprises. He has over 20 years' experience working with clients with technology-based transformation projects, and he's helped clients obtain over 300 patents for innovative technologies and process adaptations. Peter?
Well, thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here. Without further ado, I'd like to take a moment and introduce our key speaker for today, Markus Fromherz. He's currently co-leads Xerox's analytics strategy development. Until recently, he was Chief Innovation Officer for Healthcare at Xerox, one of Xerox's foci in analytics. Until 2010, Markus was Vice President at Palo Alto Research Center, PARC, where he directed their Intelligent Systems Laboratory. Markus's background is computer science and artificial intelligence. Unfortunately, we do have Craig Saunders, who is not able to participate today. He's a principal scientist in analytics, lab director at the Xerox Research Center, Europe and France. Prior to working with the Xerox job, Craig had been a professor and a consultant in analytics in the United Kingdom, and he and Markus worked pretty closely together. With that, I'm also pleased to introduce Larry Bissinger, who's the Analyst Relations Director for Xerox Services, and he'll help facilitate today's session. Larry?
Hey, thanks, Peter. And I want to extend a very warm welcome to everybody that's joining the webinar from Xerox. We hope that you find this both interesting and useful. This is the second session of our four-part innovation webinar series that's being produced by in collaboration with our friends at the Outsourcing Institute. The first iteration was a discussion of the Xerox innovation process, which was hosted by Xerox's Chief Technology Officer, Sophie Vanderbroek, and Xerox Services Chief Innovation Officer, R.G. Conley. So this is the second one. We're featuring analytics in this one. And following this one, we'll have one on robotic automation, and then the series will conclude with a webinar on Xerox's take on technology disruptors. The webinar replays, as David indicated to you a few minutes ago, are available on outsourcing.com, and also we're posting them on the Xerox Outsourcing Management virtual event website, of which we'll send you the link in the follow-up email. If you have any Xerox-specific questions that you would like to ask with respect to either this session or the webinar series, you can contact me, again, Larry Bissinger. My email address is lawrence.bissinger@xerox.com. That's LAURENCE.Bissinger, BISSINGER, @xerox.com. And with that, let me turn this over to my colleague Markus, who will lead our session today as we demonstrate how Xerox applies analytics to create new avenues of client value in the BPO arena. Markus?
Thank you, Larry, and thanks, Peter, for the introduction. So this is Markus Fromherz. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for this webinar. So we will be and you can go to the next slide. We'll be talking about analytics in business process outsourcing. This is not a webinar about analytics per se, but about the impact of analytics on business process outsourcing. We will argue that analytics has a substantial impact on BPO, and that this impact will go beyond just improving BPO itself. We believe, in fact, that analytics will transform BPO and perhaps even lead to something that will replace BPO, and I will try to make that argument throughout this presentation. We will present our perspective, and I will demonstrate our perspective with many Xerox examples. We do not have all the answers, though, so it's important that we ourselves are learning in this process, and there are a few places where I actually may have some questions for the audience. We've structured this webinar into two segments. First comes a brief introduction, overview of analytics and the analytics market, in particular as it is relevant to BPO. As I just mentioned, we will argue that the opportunity for analytics in BPO goes beyond just process improvement. We will also highlight 4 trends that are challenging both vendors and clients in BPO. Then we'll discuss what we call the transformation journey. It will be in 3 parts, from how we believe analytics is transforming not only service delivery, but also organizations, and eventually, I think, the very nature of business process outsourcing. So let's start with the first piece. Next, please. And the next one. So we define analytics as a discovery and communication of meaningful patterns in data. Typically, we expect analytics an approach to be data-driven, and we expect that there be a model that's capable of drawing inferences beyond what is apparent in the data. For example, we at Xerox analyze public transit data as part of our fare collections business. And even though the data only tells us where people, say, get on a bus, the model can actually tell us where people are most likely to get off the bus, and thus analytics can give us a more complete picture of transit use. In this sense, analytics can explain or even predict customer behaviors and business processes, and that in turn can provide actionable insights and help optimize decision-making for those business processes. Analytics is, of course, searching due to the dramatic increase in the availability of data and also the power of computing. Because of that, where we manage service processes as part of BPO, analytics is moving from a competitive advantage to very quickly becoming an operational necessity. I want to illustrate that right here with 2 examples, actually fairly recent examples from our financial services business. So we are providing client reporting in financial services, and traditionally that involves a lot of manual and email work. We developed an analytics-based solution that helps prioritize work for people and even automate some of it. And wherever we deployed that, we were able to realize efficiency gains of 30% or more have been reported. Another example, also from financial services, is in deductions management. Deductions management is about matching invoices to payments. And often payments are different from the invoices. Perhaps they're coming in installments, perhaps they're applying a discount, or maybe there's an error in it. This is traditionally done with a lot of manual labor, again, even if the information is in electronic form. And we have a solution there that in one case for a client reduced efforts by 75%. This dramatic kind of result, of course, is not due just to the analytics alone. Often analytics enables a leap in automation, which in turn saves them a lot of labor. The point, though, that I'm trying to make is that if a service provider offers these kinds of step changes, 30%, 75%, 50% in some cases, analytics is becoming an indispensable part of providing services and managing processes for everyone. If a competitor does that, you really need to draw even, and it's becoming a necessity. So we've been further trying to depict this value in the graphic on the right. Most people are probably familiar with the classification of analytics into hindsight and foresight approaches, from descriptive and diagnostic techniques to predictive and prescriptive techniques, as Gartner talks about them. Moving up in these capabilities enhances the control of a business process, which often has been more ad hoc supervision, to more proactive and real-time control. If you have a control background, you can appreciate this view of analytics acting on feedback control of a business process management. informing it with additional foresight, and we'll have some examples of that later.
So Markus, are you seeing the actionable analytics is an interesting term. Are you seeing most of your customers' cost savings coming in, well, either in cost savings or is there an element of revenue production, gathering new sources of revenue or incremental sales, some of those types of benefits?
Yeah, we're seeing both, and that is aligned, I think, with these two sides, these two segments that, or two parts that all have in this transformation journey. There is, of course, the internal improvement, like I said. It's just very often the analytics of data, of say process data, can help predict what's happening, and that can lead to better resource allocation, for example, or even to automation. But it's also the case that you can go and use any kind of foresight, any kind of prediction, for example, for planning, and that can lead to additional new services, or it can lead to expansion into additional markets, say, and so that's definitely a revenue generator as well. And for example, we're doing social media analytics as part of our customer care business now. And that's been something that's not been available in the past, and it's really been opening a new, it's a new technology, a new approach that's been allowing us to go into brand monitoring, for example, or in customer issue resolution before it escalates, and those are really new opportunities for both us and for our clients.
Thanks.
So next, I don't want to bore you with statistics, but I will try to make a point with them. So on the next slide. Maybe I'm not seeing an update. So the analytics market is large and it's growing. IDC estimates the size of the analytics services market to grow from about $54 billion this year by around 15% a year for the next several years. And the analytics services market specifically, which does not include pure analytics software and related hardware, is typically divided, as you can see here, analytics BPO, analytics consulting, there's software integration and application development, and a few other smaller categories. Actually, together, a fairly large category. But most interesting for us, of course, is the analytics BPO market, which is growing very fast, faster still, I think, than the rest. Now, this market here may sound actually small relative to the BPO market, which is well above $100 billion. However, we believe that this picture is actually misleading. When you look at this, in our opinion, this is underrepresenting the impact of analytics. We believe that analytics will be everywhere in BPO, and there will be no separate analytics BPO market in due time. And so while this is large and attractive here by itself, we believe that actually the impact of analytics will be much bigger.
How, Markus, on these, the wheel there in the center right, how does Xerox kind of integrate with the other three segments in there? I mean, are you finding most of your customers have elements of both, or are they just starting their journey and kind of in the data gathering and looking for some to rationalize it, or are they fairly comprehensive in a strategy and have other consultants in and things like that?
I think many are still early in their adoption of analytics or asking for analytics. We see that more and more in RFPs now, that clients are asking either specifically that something should go from rule-based to predictive analytics as part of, say, a fraud detection solution in our healthcare market. In other cases, though, they're more asking, what is your strategy, what competencies do you have, and don't really have specific asks because they're often not sure where it's best applied, and they're leaving it to the vendor, to the bids that are coming in. Okay?
Great, makes sense.
So I want to say a few words about Xerox and why Xerox actually can talk intelligently about analytics and analytics in BPO. Next slide. So Xerox BPO helps customers in areas that you might not expect. It's very broad, from healthcare to finance and accounting, from HR to customer care, transportation, as well as, of course, our traditional managed print services and graphic communications markets, as you see on here. And we will draw, as I've already started, from several of these areas for our examples of the impact of analytics. Next, Xerox processes billions of transactions in all of these a year across a range of fields, again, in finance, healthcare, transportation. I'll let you look at some of the statistics on here. And you might ask, as you already did, Peter, why does Xerox do analytics here, and what kind of analytics? Now, primarily we do analytics to help our clients improve their current operations, or when we run the business process, to improve the business process as we take it over, and to help with those BPO services. We are not here to sell more software or computers or advertising space or anything like that. All our analytics is embedded in the services part. We operate a diverse range of complete BPO services, and thus we have more incentive than often others to tackle the more specialized and difficult problems. We often take on an entire system, for example, all of Medicaid in a state, and so we have to worry about all aspects of this and interplays, and we have to scale to go beyond point solutions, and we can innovate in the business processes and the analytics simultaneously.
I'm sorry, Markus. What's Xerox's ability, or any provider, analytics provider, ability to cross-correlate? That's an impressive amount of data. Are there restrictions? I mean, what's the ability to kind of draw some more general trends across these data streams?
It really varies very widely. We have in some areas like healthcare, obviously restrictions and privacy concerns are much bigger than in some other areas where it's more public and it's much more anonymous, like, say, public transit. But even within healthcare, it varies widely. Some states absolutely require the data to stay in the state, maybe even in the capital of the state on the servers. And then other states are more open and willing to share the data even across states in order for some learning across that. So it's something that we are acutely aware of and very careful with, obviously. And in some cases, it also requires an education of the client. There is a knee-jerk reaction. There have been many breaches, obviously, over the last few years. And so everybody is worried about data and data going out. On the other hand, in healthcare, for example, we can provide a lot of additional benefit if we share data, anonymously, of course, but we share data across multiple clients. For example, we provide analytics to hospitals, and the more they can learn from each other, and you can anonymously aggregate the data and then use that to learn at a much larger and more comprehensive level, the more we can provide that learning back to then the individual client. And as clients have been learning more about that, they've been willing to be more open, again, under all the regulatory constraints, of course, but been seeing the benefit. And so that, some cases we need to renegotiate contracts or so on, but that's been something we've been working on. That's been also another journey.
Thank you.
So let me talk next a bit about innovation, since I just mentioned that. It is it has been for a long time, of course, at the core of our work at Xerox. We've been doing analytics for a long time. In fact, we've performed pretty broad research in almost all of our research centers. That includes the Palo Alto Research Center, or PARC, where I'm sitting here, to our European Research Center in Grenoble, France, to our newer research center in India, where a lot of the analytics research related to developing markets is happening. Not long ago, Xerox was on MIT's list of most disruptive companies. That's for our work on parking analytics in Los Angeles. Xerox was one of Fortune's Big Data All-Stars 2014, and we've gotten numerous awards for analytics enhanced offerings. We often do analytics research in collaboration with our clients. We have a customer-led innovation practice, and as part of that, we are engaging fairly early. One particular competency I'd like to highlight in where Xerox is actually fairly unique in analytics research and delivery is our research and expertise in ethnography. So in addition to the data, we often take a close look at work practices and consumer behaviors. First-hand look where we pretend to be part of the team, or we're going out videotaping, interviewing, and whatnot. And this ethnography, this ethnographic research regularly influences where and how we deploy analytics internally and for our clients. On top of that, it's often a great explainer. It provides real examples that help understand what's going on and why some things are the way they are. Before I go to the next segment, as a transition, next I would like to highlight 4 trends in the application of analytics. In the interest of time, I go fairly quickly through this. As most people know, the world is moving from rule-based and descriptive analytics to predictive and prescriptive analytics. Here are a few examples. There are actually relatively few examples of prescriptive analytics today, but it will be essential on the road towards automation of business processes. As one example, in our customer care business, we are analyzing past trends of call patterns to predict spikes in call rates, for example, based on seasonal patterns or special events. And that enables the organization to staff up to meet anticipated demand without sacrificing service quality. Next, the world is moving from reactive action to proactive action. So, for example, in our fraud and compliance business, issues are often analyzed after the fact. Traditionally, it happens after the fraud or even when a lawsuit is brought forward. And generally, organizations now are interested in catching fraud while it happens, or even designing systems in a way that manage risk and prevent fraud from happening in the first place. So in the healthcare fraud detection business, we are moving from post-pay audit to pre-pay interception of fraudulent claims. Next, the world is moving from static use of analytics to dynamic use, more real-time use. So, for example, in our transportation sector, cities can use our transit analytics to plan new bus lines based on needs, or they can add more parking spaces, parking houses, depending on the analysis of past needs and uses in the city. Now, however, what's becoming possible is analyzing real-time data from ticketing and from sensors that can lead to the dynamic scheduling of public transit, or it can lead to on-the-fly changes to tolling and parking rates. And we can respond much faster to events as they happen to keep the city moving. And that is, in fact, something we've deployed first in LA and now in the process in other places, dynamic pricing of parking based on real-time analytics of supply and demand. Very powerful, very cool. And you can find more online if you're interested. There's some cool videos. And finally, the world is moving from siloed applications to connected applications. In healthcare, for example, we've started to integrate clinical data with financial data for our hospital clients. And we believe that breaking those silos of these two worlds can lead to better treatment. Or in transportation, we're combining parking data with public transportation, with infrastructure data, and hope to deliver for our cities better urban mobility around these different modes of transportation. Some of these trends, of course, work together. All of them are challenging us, as they are some of our clients. Often the analytics, in fact, itself is the least of our concerns. For example, organizations are often not set up to take advantage of the dynamic availability of analytics insights, the type I just explained. So even if you can provide insights in real time, the infrastructure or the business model may just not be there yet to use it. Another example, moving towards connected applications. It's not just a question of integrating data from different sources. That's a difficult problem in its own right, and there's a lot being written about that. But organizations are often divided into departments that haven't been working together in the past. And we may not even have a single client to interface with if we try to sell an integrated solution. And that's an area that, again, we're still working through. So some interesting challenges here around these trends. So next I would like to move to the second segment of this webinar. And next we will be telling our transformation journey. I'd like to tell it in 3 parts. Here's a brief overview. A fundamental and first view of analytics in PPR, I've now mentioned several times, is of course to optimize internal processes in the service delivery. As we said, here it's becoming essential to be able to compete at the top for a BPO provider, and it has the promise of delivering agile and reliable services, say here. Now, as we expose insights about these processes, and you asked about this, Peter, earlier, so exposing them to clients, this opens new opportunities for new services or to transform services for our clients. Some of the most recent examples we've seen actually look like they're leading to structural changes in the organization that can change clients' organization, in fact. In the course of that, the relationship between us and the client is changing, and it has the potential to become more of a strategic partnership, I would say. And I'll say more about that. The third part of that journey then is a consequence of either of these 2 parts. Disruption from innovation in analytics can lead to changing business models. In some cases, the deployment of analytics enables new business models. In other cases, it actually requires them. And we'll discuss some examples and observations. But as I mentioned earlier, this is an area where we really don't have a definitive framework yet. And I still
Markus, where are some of the relationships, the strongest relationships within a customer? I mean, are you seeing these come out of the marketing, CEO, chief marketing officer, funding new projects? Is it coming out of IT? Is it coming out of the business units, the contact center or something like that? Or is it coming out of somewhere else? Who within organizations is kind of driving these transformations?
I'm not sure there's a single place. I think more and more it is the organization, the unit inside the client's organization that's responsible for performing or delivering the service.
The business units? Yeah, the business units. I know you've got contact centers, things like that.
Yeah, it's not IT. It's not marketing. It is, if like I said, and that leads sometimes to this challenge I just mentioned about siloed organizations. If we would like to combine parking with public transit, because people need to, they drive to a train station and then they take the train, and combining this in one seamless service, you're actually talking to 2 different agencies, right? And those are the ones driving the changes. They all want to improve, and they don't necessarily mind working together, but they're just 2 separate agencies.
How do you get past the, we've always done it this way? I mean, I'd imagine in the client organization, not all of the team is equipped to really look at this with an open mind.
It helps sometimes to develop a prototype, a demo that does some first-level analysis of data and says, based on this, here is some observation about your organization or about your clients, your consumers, or so your customers or your patients for hospitals, etc. And the client then sometimes, very often says, it becomes more visual this way. It becomes more real, tangible, and then say, this is interesting. If you can say something about this, you also say something about that. Here's another thing that we've been struggling with. We didn't really have an answer to. Can you find that in the data? And then we can have that starts a conversation and gets us on a path of integrating analytics and providing that the additional services perhaps to the client. I think clients generally, I mean, people generally are not adverse. They may ask questions about, again, privacy and the like, but those are questions we can answer. And you know, if you have tangible examples, make it concrete. That helps a lot. So let me move to the first part of this three-part journey about optimizing processes. Analytics, of course, is the ultimate tool for data-driven, evidence-based decision-making. The next slide, please. So we can take into account data over a longer period from more sources than typical control or supervision of business processes. And by taking both the long and the broad view, analytics enables better informed service management, for example, for resource allocations. I had some examples. Here's how we've often seen it happen. The first step typically is partial automation, IT systems that operate maybe using rule sets to avoid manual processing. Next, predictive analytics, which is predicting events and outcomes, enables proactive decision-making, and that can push automation further. For example, we can be analyzing incoming documents, emails, invoices, calls, and perform sorting or writing tasks based on that in a proactive manner. Prescriptive analytics, which is prescribing actions, the best actions perhaps to reach a particular outcome, then finally paves the way for full automation. Now, these are tactical improvements. They can lead to substantial reductions in cost and risk. As I already mentioned, some numbers even. Raising quality at the same time, actually. And that's been demonstrated along a wide range of services. And so the tagline is, you know, we can simplify the business processes for our clients. On the next page, I'd like to show a concrete example. Yet another example, maybe a little more concrete. A detailed example comes from our customer care business, specifically our WDS unit. They've been inventing what you might call Care 2.0. A common application of customer care is, of course, that customers call with product issues. They bought, say, a smartphone and have an issue with it. Here in this example, if you can read it, the question actually starts with, I can't get in touch with my sister. This is a pretty vague problem statement, and then that can lead an agent through many different questions of trying to resolve what the problem might be. The WDS Agent IQ system that we have deployed for a few years is an analytics-driven knowledge base about customers' issues, and that alternate agents, or in a self-help scenario, people can use to respond to such customer calls. In the system, machine learning is used in the customer interaction loop to learn about problems and symptoms, and then help the customer or the agent work through an issue towards the solution. It's sort of a cognitive platform that you might say learns like we do, in quotes. It's trained to decipher customer symptoms, likely causes, and then the most statistically proven resolutions. Next, because of that, the customer service experience becomes more consistent, it becomes more accurate, it becomes more engaging, I would say. But importantly, I think this example illustrates how advanced analytics, including, in this case, detailed textual understanding, is improving a service delivery process. It leads to faster resolution, faster drive based on the statistics towards a resolution. The responses have a higher accuracy, the time of resolution goes down, the cost of the service overall goes down. And you can see here also on the right that we can, in addition, easily get some additional business intelligence, such as whether symptoms, issues, solutions being reported. And that in turn helps us, of course, manage the overall business process in this case. So this is an example of how we can realize significant productivity gains. A limitation, though, is that the process improvements like these can typically only be made within the constraints and the limited view of the outsourced business process. And going beyond that is our next step. So next, as I want to argue insights from business process analytics not only can improve the process itself, it can often give insights which can be fed back to the client, like what I just said about top symptoms, for example, top customer issues. More than that, a holistic view across multiple processes of a client's enterprise, that is a view at the macro level, can help redesign business processes and even reorganize business structures. For example, for the customer care example that I just gave, you can appreciate that if we also looked at the product acquisition process and the repair process, perhaps marketing, and so on, we could get an even better picture of the customer needs and the challenges around a particular product. Now, interesting thing happens when we're exposing such lessons from the vendor to the client, because the relationship between the vendor and the client in this really has the potential to become more of a strategic partnership, by which I mean that the vendor is involved in decision-making around long-term plans. It can lead to improvements upstream on the client side, can typically expand even to improve not just processes, but the approach to a particular service. So in other words, I'm trying to say here that analytics has been allowing more informative feedback and greater foresight in the business process can now be applied at a higher macro level. And this strategic transformation can lead to some newer and some dramatically improved experiences for a client's customers. So let me next show this illustrated with an example. This is again from our public sector business, specifically public transit. So I already mentioned a few times Xerox manages fare collection systems for many cities. Traditionally, the focus here has been on processing fare transactions. In fact, we do millions of these per day across the world. And the insights from the analytics can be used to optimize the processing of these transactions, but increasingly clients have asked us to expose the insights from our transportation business to try to get a deeper understanding of the whole system. And in fact, increasingly, I'm trying to drive this point home. This spans transit, it spans tolling, parking, enforcement, like red light cameras, and other transportation-related agencies. In response to these client requests, in particular for this example here in public transit, we have helped clients get an understanding of their customers' behaviors. For example, in public transit, a key question is, where do people want to travel within a city? If you go next, you see here an example. Traditional reporting only gives us an abstract view of a city, typically with point information. For example, we may get the number of validations at a certain bus stop by time of day, by day of week, etc. But we're not getting any insight into individual journeys. Advanced analytics has allowed us to go over this whole transaction data to extract additional information and give city planners insight into, for example, vehicle loads, citizen movements, like the journey through the city from one place to another, where the major centers of sources of a journey and the destinations of these journeys at different times of the day, network change impact, and much more. So the city can use that in the redesign, for example, of transit routes. They can add or remove bus lines based on this, on the analytics. And in this case, now analytics is used for long-range planning and design of the entire system, not just the optimization of one particular process. I don't want to oversell this, but in the course, we have observed that Xerox has increasingly been invited to participate as a partner. For example, we're sometimes sitting in on strategic sessions now to help with these answers. To tie this back to something that I said earlier when we talked about innovation, this is also where ethnography has made a big difference, because we do not just rely on the data. We have concrete observations on the ground that provide color and explanations about individual, people, for example, here moving through the city. It explains to us what the data tells us, why it is. It makes the insights so much more understandable and believable. And that's actually been important in those conversations between us and clients. and also within them. So finally, for our third part in this transformation journey, improvements at the process and even at the structural levels may require changes to the business model, or it may enable actually new opportunities with new business models, and I'd like to talk about this next. I mentioned tactical improvements and strategic transformation. So these tactical improvements from part one, analytics here often enables new ways of managing business processes, for example, with outcome-based SLAs instead of transaction-based SLAs, so service-level agreements. Through the strategic transformations from part two, analytics sometimes enables shifted or new services, maybe new markets even. More and more, those changes also come with new business models than those that are currently in place. One typical one that at first it may seem obvious, so we think that's of course the main way to go. Analytics seems to allow and behave, perhaps even compel us to go from transaction-based contracts to outcome-based contracts. And indeed, analytics does provide us with a much better understanding of the processes, which can help better risk management, and that makes possible to go at risk sometimes to guarantee certain outcomes. That seems natural and desirable. For example, in customer care, instead of paying for each call, one would expect that clients want to pay for customer satisfaction, no matter what the mechanism is of interaction between the company and the customer. There are some additional advantages. For example, in such contracts, they become independent of the interaction channel, whether it's web-based, app-based, and whatnot. If a service provider gets paid by the call, they want to sell you more calls. If they get paid for customer satisfaction, they will want to deliver customer care in whatever way is most cost-effective and leads to better outcomes for the customer. I'll have some more examples in a minute, and that shows that actually this transition is not straightforward either for the provider of the BPO services or the client. And in fact, also, we have some business processes where we will actually likely go the other way, away from what used to be outcome-based to more transaction-based. Either way, the application of analytics can have a fundamental and disruptive impact. It can change both the business you do and how you do the business. So next, let's look at some examples. First, I'd like to emphasize this point. The industries are changing. For example, in transportation, cities are moving from worrying about how vehicles are moving to moving people, no matter what the mechanism is. And it's, of course, changing dramatically right now with, for example, the sharing economy. You can see here the transition on the slide from towards more integrated platforms for multimodal transportation. Similarly, in customer care, as I just alluded to, we are moving from providing individual services to serving individuals, no matter what the mechanism is, again. And you can see here the transition to integrated experiences for customers across many processes. That's the desired goal. As I said, we don't really have a general framework at this point for these changes, so I'll just offer 3 concrete examples that illustrate changes in business models and some of the challenges that we are working through. So next, in customer care, we do believe that BPO will move to outcome-based services, but the timing isn't clear. So when I talk to our folks in that business, it seems that many clients actually are not quite ready or comfortable to accept outcome-based contracts. How do we measure customer satisfaction, for example? Do we need to outsource more of a customer service across all channels and perhaps the entire product lifecycle to a single provider in order to get that benefit? Or is there some other way of doing this? How the technology is changing very fast, to web-based, app-based care delivery, even virtual or automated agents. And so customer cares will be changing dramatically in the next several years. But on the other hand, it looks like call centers are here to stay for a while still. You have a question?
Yeah, Markus, I was going to say, it seems that the richness of the underlying data, I mean, I'm kind of thinking to the insurance industry, maybe the first really big data application, and actuarials, but it would allow Xerox and the customer care business to have maybe a deeper understanding of their customers' objectives and call patterns. And I would think some of those outcome-based contracts might be able to move more in a direction that would be attractive to customers, maybe sway them, as opposed to having them based on customer satisfaction, on maybe some different types of monetary outcomes, either top-line revenue growth as opposed to bottom-line cost cutting.
Exactly. I completely agree. So that's what I've been trying to have some examples for, right? Where if we can combine call patterns with web access and maybe app use and so on, and often clients actually, we're observing these transitions where they may be starting on the web, and then from there it goes to a phone call, and then after that they go to social media to either say good things or maybe complain. There's this whole transition that they go to, and the more you can tie that together and not just be limited to one silo on one particular channel, the richer your knowledge about that person and what they're trying to achieve. You can improve the process itself. So for example, if somebody already spent some time on the web and then calls, we can actually feed that in, and the agent is prepped with some basic information and maybe something about what the customer was looking for. And so that call becomes much faster than if you have to start from scratch. But we can also step back and have this more holistic picture of what a customer is trying to achieve and how they thought about it afterwards when they go to social media with that. And that can help both us and the client improve all kinds of things, those customer interactions, the engagement, the product design even, and so on. Still, like I said, it's how do we measure that customer satisfaction, for example? It's a non-trivial question, and I think that there's no universal agreed upon way of doing this, and that of course might be a gating factor here for outcome-based contracts.
Yep.
So for my second example, this is mobility management. In mobility, so cities are becoming more and more interested in managing all transportation in a more integrated fashion. And the challenge here is not just to integrate multiple city services, but also public and private services, like those coming from the so-called sharing economy, like Uber and Lyft. The point here is that transportation in a city can't be managed well by outsourcing these individual services. If you want to optimize the entire system, it will require matching the entire system as one. And in that respect, it is probably similar to the customer service problem I just described. And again, there, more than customer care perhaps, we have different agencies today, typically in the city, focusing on different aspects. But there is interest in integrating more of this. For the third example, most people are familiar with fraud detection for credit card transactions, where it's actually in real time. But in healthcare, the containment of fraud, waste, and abuse traditionally has been deployed as audit services. And so these are post-pay contracts where maybe the last year or 2 years worth of claims, healthcare claims, are being analyzed. And then clients only pay if fraud is detected and recovered, usually as a percentage of the recovery. That's, of course, attractive to the client. It's like paying from found money. At the same time, today, more and more clients, and that's led by the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, CMS, are interested in detecting fraud while or even before it happens, and so in this way avoiding having to pay for fraudulent transactions in the first case. Now, this is a change from post-pay to pre-pay services, and it requires a different business model. Fraud detection becomes fraud interception. It's more like virus detection, perhaps managed as a subscription service. This is standard in other domains, but in healthcare, clients are not used to paying up front, and then typically have questions about what's the success rate of a service and how do we know that you actually are successful in intercepting fraud. You might have that question about your virus detection on your computer, but you sort of trust that it does its job, and that's something that is coming in healthcare. Those questions are not necessarily easy to answer, and they can be a barrier to the adoption of prepay fraud detection. There's one more thing I want to mention on fraud detection. So the current move, as I just said, is from in healthcare towards prepay detection, but the future is actually going to be, it's going even further to fraud prevention through program redesign, and people talk about program integrity. So if you can design the program in a way, for example, that it keeps bad actors out, then you don't have to worry about fraud as much later on. So you would go even further upstream to, for example, enrollment of people into the program. And again, this is another example where the traditional services provider will be asked to become more of strategic consultants to the client. So that concludes our transformation journey. If you move forward, before we take further questions, if you have time for that, I'd like to summarize what I've been trying to convey in this presentation. So I argue that analytics is transforming business process outsourcing. Process improvement is becoming mandatory. And the next step is the strategic use of analytics by or on behalf of clients. And the future then, if you agree with that, is, and we believe, is a transformation of BPO itself from traditional outsourcing relationship to more of a business service partnership. Now next, as I said, we do not yet understand all the implications, and we're probably not alone in this. Here's just a few of the challenges we visited. Analytics delivers a new level of transparency and immediacy. Clients and end customers gain better insights, and they will get those sooner, sometimes in real time, which raises expectation across the board. End users are also demanding the integration of services. They will want a seamless experience in customer service, in transportation, in healthcare, and more domains are touched in BPO are touched in this fashion. And then finally, we have argued that new business models challenge both providers and clients, and this will continue to evolve. And perhaps the only answer here really is to remain agile on both sides. And that's something, of course, analytics will play a major role in. With that, I'd like to thank you, Peter, and the rest audience.
Thank you so much. A real quick general question before we wrap up. I think we just have a minute or two left. What's your next big barrier you're working on there at Palo Alto Research Center Park? I mean, what do you think the next some of the next couple of breakthroughs are going to be in this field of analytics, and some of the some of the trend analysis and telemetry?
One important aspect will be more of the embedding of analytics in processes. So a typical use today is still that you provide the insights through visualizations to a person, and then the person is making decisions based on that. More and more we can tie the analytics to automation, whether that leads to the kind of dynamic pricing for parking I mentioned, or it leads to automatic routing of calls, or it leads to automatic decisions around, for example, this, in financial services, this deduction management example, where some of the reconciliation is done automatically, or in claims processing, where we can make decisions of what to approve and not to approve more and more automatically. These are all examples where it's embedding, and that leads to several changes. The architecture changes slightly. The way data flows in a real-time basis and incrementally is different from just using a big chunk of data, and so on. I think the closer, bringing more and more ethnography to analytics, I think, is another interesting example of work that's sort of that we are doing more of, marrying more of. So like one of the figure, and we're trying to articulate that also, and how we're bringing that to the market, I think, is another important aspect.
Well, thank you. Well, I have to tell you, I've really enjoyed our time today. It occurs to me that this whole big data analytics piece is resembling more of a biological figure rather than the old mechanical one. It lives, it breathes, it adapts, it improves, ages. I kind of have three takeaways. I took away I see it as a function within BPO, not just an overlay. It's just not something we do and then we go off and do some of our business processing, but that the perspective needs to be holistic. We just can't look at one silo at a time. The second one I kind of took away from here was the idea of analytics as a top-line revenue grower, not just process improvement to whittle away a couple cents here and a couple cents there. I mean, I think from an industry perspective, I think that's the untapped. The revenue growth is the untapped market. The final one, which was really a pleasure to meet you, Markus, and the rest of the Xerox team, was just the long history that Xerox has in research and development, all the way back, I think, over 40 years with the Palo Alto Research Center. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to David, and thank you so much for letting me participate today.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Peter. And I just want to thank Xerox and thank Markus for his presentation today. It's very informative, and thank you all to those who have listened in and those who are listening on the recording. Thank you and have a good day.